Welcome and good afternoon, everyone, to this amazing moment that we come together to study, to pray, to get together. Yes, still online, virtually, but we are here together, enlightening our lives through the SSB, communicating with one another, the teachings that Spiritism brings to our hearts and our minds. Tonight, this afternoon, into this evening, we'll have Kirsten talking to us about Jesus and enemies. But before we pass the word to Kirsten, I would like to read a passage of the book Happy Life and then pray so we can harmonize ourselves and prepare and pave this moment with a good heart. Joanna de Angelis says the following: if someone is being accused of something, keep your silence. Most people have no idea what preceded events that occur. Things are not always as they seem, but rather are in keeping with a inner reality. Do not join in the chorus of accusers. The criminal and the unfortunate sinner deserve, at the very least, consideration and a chance at re education. With this message, then, we invite everyone to pray, to follow the words that we will be saying, so we can all tune ourselves with our Master Jesus and with one another. We thank you, dear Lord, for this amazing opportunity that we have to be here again, connected with one another, with our Master Jesus, with our mentors, learning and sharing a little bit of ourselves. We send our good vibrations to all of those who are connected with us now or who will be watching us in the future. We are thankful for this amazing opportunity and what will bring us as we apply the teachings that we are about to receive in our lives. We invite everyone to foresee ourselves dealing with our friends, but also our enemies, those whom still have to take care or to fix something, perhaps of the past, or even difficulties that we will face in the future. It is with our hearts full of joy and open for this message that we kickstart this amazing evening with one another and with you, and so be it. And as we were saying, Kirsten will be giving continuation and really finalizing the study of this amazing book, Jesus in Our Days. This is chapter 20th, entitled Jesus and Enemies. Kirsten have been giving talks about this amazing book throughout last year, and here we are to finalize today. And hopefully soon we'll start or study other books as well, as we try to do, so we can connect with these higher minds that Spiritism brings to us. With no further ado, Kirsten, please. You're on mute.
Hey! Here I am. Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for tuning in to this week's live. It's always a joy and a pleasure to be in this community and to be able to share this amazing message with friends and like-minded people. So, of course, you know what? There's a slight error. My apologies. Let me just change this real quick. Just bear with me one second. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. So this is our chapter for today. But before actually we go to this, we did want to touch on something that we know that we've already gone through all of the chapters, and this week is our last chapter of this book, Jesus in Our Days. Now, if you're not familiar, this book is volume 1 of Joanna de Angelis's psychological series. She has 16 total in this series, 16 volumes. And I've highlighted and and I'm not sure if it's appearing. I don't think it's appearing just yet for you guys on the screen. It looks like there's a little bit of a delay. But I've highlighted here the ones that are bolded and underlined. Those are the ones that are currently in English, and hopefully all 16 in the very near future will all be in English. But today we will be focusing on the end chapter of this book, Jesus in Our Days, Jesus and Enemies. And as we always say, for all of her chapters and all of her books, this chapter is the most amazing. It is so relevant for what's going on in the world and just our, society at large, just everyone. I feel like it is so universal and encompasses so many things for us. So let's go ahead and dive right into it so we can absorb, hopefully, some of Joanna's messages that she brings to us and bring us closer to Jesus also in tandem. But actually, before we jump into that, we also wanted just to take a brief moment to give thanks to the person, the man, the soul, or actually two people technically, behind some of the work of Joanna de Angelis, and that will be the famous medium, Divaldo Franco. He's Brazilian, lives in Brazil, and he's a spiritist medium. And he founded this beautiful community called Mansion of the Way. For those of you who are not familiar with it, we just wanted to give a quick shout out to Mansion of the Way and all the wonderful work that they do. And I was trying to find an English website. There are some. I know the SSB has a link that kind of describes what it is about. You also can go on YouTube, type in Mansion of the Way. There's a great video that you can find about Mansion of the Way. But for those of you who might be interested in, who really love this Joanna de Angelis series and want to help see it continue to prosper, but also, these books that are being sold, all of the proceeds are going to help these children in this really impoverished community that we would call like underserved and very poor community there in Brazil. Anyway, just kind of wanted to highlight who the actual medium was for the book. And of course, you can see down below, you see Uncle Nielsen, who also helped founded Mansion of the Way, who has since passed back on to the spirit realm. And below here, you can see his spirit guide, Joanna de Angelis. This is not the actual physical spirit guide. This is actually the actress who played in his movie. We just really felt like she looked a lot like the real Joanna de Angelis. So I digress. Let's get into it this evening. Joanna starts out this chapter, this final chapter, really bringing everything home for us. Because she once again, as she usually does, reminds us of the world that we're living in and why it's important to observe and be aware of ourselves in our inner world, of what's going on within our mind, but also what's going on around us. Because inevitably, we live in a world of energy and everything influences us, whether we realize it or not. So she starts out this chapter in saying, while technological progress has provided people with comfort, it relentlessly equalizes people at the same level, producing a sort of dehumanizing equality that consumerism has established as an important social achievement. Super fancy words to say that although technology is fantastic, it has allowed us to prolong life. Medicine in general has allowed us to live longer and happier, or at least have a better quality of life. However, because of this because of this consumerism, because of this technology, the negative side of it is that we kind of become like a robot in a sense. All we are to companies is a dollar sign. We become nothing more than someone who these various companies want to sell to us. And so if you actually study about finances, economy, Maybe not everyone agrees with this, but to some degree, it is a never-ending negative loop in the way in which things are created, how debt is incurred. And in order for us to better our FICO score or our credit report, you have to incur more debt, and it's like a never-ending loop. So it's just like we're constantly in this rat race. So it doesn't make a lot of sense in terms of how we really should be living. Yet for the majority of people, we're stuck in this loop of consumerism, and it's been established as social achievement. And what does that mean? Well, it means that, and she's going to explain that we're looking at people that have things as a high social status. She says, in fact, a community is regarded as happy due to the electronic devices, automobiles, yachts, and airplanes available to it. So the more stuff we have, it's regarded as a better society for the most part. And we all know that is not true. In developing countries, you can look at suicide rates. The rate of depression is so much more greater. It's probably nearly doubled what it was a long time ago. Now, some of that is because we have more mechanisms of identifying it. Yes, absolutely, for sure. But these technological advances has also sort of brought us apart in some ways. In some ways, it brings us together. Ergo, here we are, in the middle of a pandemic, yet we're still able to connect. So that is a very positive thing. But Joanna what she's doing in this chapter is she's questioning the status quo. Is what we find to be normal? It's what everyone does. And even myself, I must admit, I remember many years ago having a challenging conversation with my husband about America and student loan debt. And for the way that we grew up here in the United States of America, it's so normal. It's just, you live and die with debt. You live and die with hundreds of thousands of debt, and that's just the way that it is. It becomes a social norm. It's just like, oh, well, everyone's in debt, so who cares? Get another credit card, take out student loans, live the rest of your life trying to pay off things and living a slave. So Joanna, in her way, is questioning that, what we consider to be normal. Is that the best way? Is that the way that we should be living? She goes on. She says, fads rage, causing copycat behavior, where people imitate one another, assuming identical postures, with a weakening of ideals, ethics, family, and the individual per se. And if you study marketing, if you study trends, if you study fads, if you've ever been into, if you've gone to college for, e-commerce and studying all those things, you can see it's nothing but a big cycle of people, repeating or trying to, for instance, I'll give you a more concrete example. If you see a video that goes viral, you will find other people on the internet repeating that same idea or context of that video because they know that it works, so they repeat it. And even recently, I was talking to someone who is a creator online, and she told me that this is exactly what creators do. Not all the time, not consistently, but it's a thing that they do. Copycat behavior. Because it's the norm, it's what we do. So things go viral, and we normalize certain things that really shouldn't be normalized. We normalize profanity. We normalize a lot of negative, toxic behavior. Now there seems to be this push of more positivity. Of course, there's a whole other sect of people, even the Gen Z and millennial population, that are really pushing towards spirituality, that are really, notice that they have these high incidences of depression and anxiety and all these issues, that they're searching for something more. Joanna goes on to say, in reaction to such conduct, there are an increasing number of those who present themselves as original, the counterculture, who are no longer shocking with their exoticism. and scorn of everything and everyone. Readily accepted and imitated at first, they are quickly discarded once the novelty wears off. Once again, I'm going to use the example of social media. And for those of you from the millennial generation or younger, or even older, if you are connected in with social media, you can see, if you look back 10 years, people that were huge on social media and were doing all kinds of crazy things, you don't even know where they are. And not just social media, you can find this in different artists who once upon a time were huge and big, and now they're nowhere to be found. And we can see people that really, throughout history, that stood out, and it appeared as though they were original, and really it just was that they were going against the grain, and to some degree it's good, but also they're just propagating some negativity. So we can see people that are coming out the woodwork, basically what Joanna is saying here, who's presenting themselves as, oh, I'm original, I've created this, so that it no longer becomes shocking to us because it becomes mainstream. And then those people, once the new wears off, as they say, they're nowhere to be found. They fade away into the background, which once again forces us to question the status quo, to question what is the purpose of our lives? What are we doing? Why am I here? What is this all about? And if you study a little bit about history and the industrial revolution, you can see, starting from the 18th century, where it started, where water and steam power, mechanical manufacturing facilities, and the start of the 20th century, when the Industrial Revolution with the manufacturing assembly line and, electricity, gas, water, the bettering of roads, et cetera, and then the late 20th century, of course, the big electronic boom, telephones, PCs, things of that nature. And now here we find ourselves today, using mobile devices, clouds, smart devices, everything's connected. I mean, really everything is connected. And there's so many positive things that come out of that, so many great things that do come out of that. But there are also some not so great things that we need to be aware of that can come out of this. Trends and normalization of certain things, negative things that just becomes, oh, that's just normal. So it's things that we, whether we're parents or teachers, educators, or just human beings wanting to be more self-aware, should be taking a look at. And I apologize, this should have been animated here, but we're going to work with this. She goes on to say, such postures hide so-called collective complexes, which destroy life by installing a climate of indifference, if not instability, in people. Can I read that again? Such postures hide so-called collective complexes, which destroy life by installing a climate of indifference, if not instability, in people. When we were reading and studying this reminded us of, for those of you who are familiar with that movie called Mean Girls, there's a mean girl culture. It's not just with women, it's with men too, but they refer to it as mean girl culture. We hide behind these social statuses and we create this climate of indifference that, I don't care, I'll do what I want to do. And all it really does is make people as individuals and just the climate around us unstable, unhappy. And Joanna goes on to say, there are models for all types of individuals with unjustifiable contempt for their human identity, suffocated by the lack of humaneness and afraid of confronting themselves. People seek refuge in political parties, social and sports clubs, and various clusters. They stay in the crowd but suffer unbearable loneliness. They see enemies everywhere and try to avoid them, using various types of segregationist artifices, all the while hiding behind a democratic and supportive facade. Wow, this is a huge mouthful. And folks, I'm going to say, although we do have every bit of text in this chapter, we always recommend that you go back, reread this chapter on your own, study it, and restudy it again, because truly these are textbooks. These chapters are akin to and equate what a modern day textbook would be for us if we were studying about psychology and spirituality and things of that nature. So we can find so many, and we're going to paraphrase here, but we can find so many different models and types of individuals, as Joanna says, who are unhappy from different areas of life. And this, when she refers to this lack of humaneness, kind of also is a nod to the beginning of this chapter, when she basically talks about how the technological advances causes a bit of dehumanization. We become just a number to companies to sell to. And when we turn on our internet, our web browser, when we log on to our computer, the way that the systems, the algorithms and that's created, they are catering to things, catering to us so we can be a consumer of whatever they're trying to sell. So we become dehumanized. You know, these companies are no longer looking at us as individuals with different backgrounds, you know, not as spiritual beings having a human experience, not at all. And we are bombarded by these things, and we fall into these things. So when she talks about this lack of humaneness, this is what happens. We're suffocated by this lack of humaneness, this coldness that inevitably comes about. And this is we know that this is an interesting chapter because we're in the middle of a pandemic. So our humaneness, you know, most times when we're able to be in physical contact with someone, it oftentimes allows us, you know, to embrace one another, just to have that warmth of another human being. That doesn't mean that these technological advances can't be used to propagate or share messages of how to be more humane, how to be more kind, how to be more loving, and treating others with respect and as individuals. But instead, what happens to people? They hide. But because people can't physically just go hide in a cave somewhere, we hide under different facades. We hide behind, as Joanna says here, political parties, social and sports clubs, and various clusters. That's not to say, I don't believe she's saying here that political things are wrong necessarily in and of itself, but just that some people use it to hide behind without truly facing who they are. And when we hide, we live this life of fear. So what I propagate or what I, you know, work on or constantly think about, that's also how my vision is going to be. My perspective is going to be that way. So I'm so fearful that I'm going to see enemies everywhere. Then I segregate myself, and you just live this life of fear because you don't want to be found out who you are. So it's this negative, again, like we were saying earlier, it's this negative loop that just keeps going and going. And then we think in buying things and having a yacht and all these things, not that being wealthy is wrong and not that having a yacht makes you a bad person, not at all. We're talking about our intentions behind it. And only you, the individual, me, the individual, will truly know what my intentions, what my inner world is like. I cannot pass that judgment onto someone else. I mean, I can, and people do every day, especially on the internet. But in reality, we just don't know people. It's so easy. It's so easy. I saw something the other day on a famous person's social media page, and he's quite famous, and he was actually revealing to his, I guess you could say, his public, that he actually suffers from profound depression. And he actually was showing a video when he was having sort of his episodic moments or days of depression, and he was showing how wonderful his wife was in comforting him. And someone had commented something really unkind, we'll put it that way. And basically that just said, this is fake. You're happy in all your videos and all your photos. And this social media famous person actually responded and said, was super kind in response to them and just said, no, I'm actually not. What you see is not always reality, and it's easy to put it on a facade that I have millions of followers and that I'm happy, but here I have my own, so-called demons or struggles. So we never know, just like this photo here, there's that mask that we wear, whether we're aware that we wear it or not, whether we consciously put it on or not, it's there. But the interesting thing about this chapter, remember, it's entitled Jesus and Enemies. Jesus and Enemies. Joanna begins to go into that right here. She says the cruelest enemies, however, lie within individuals themselves. The cruelest enemies. We believe that's a nod to that old saying, we are our own worst enemy. Let's take a brief pause here. And we want you, next time you have a moment where you're upset with yourself, and listen to what you say to yourself. And basically, whatever it is that you're saying to yourself, would you say that thing to somebody you love and cherish deeply? So for instance, if for some reason, whatever the reasons are, whatever the circumstances, but you do something that you realize was not good and you feel terrible for it and you realize that. So you start telling yourself, oh my gosh, I'm a terrible person. How can I do that? I'm such an idiot, or I'm so dumb. I hear this all the time. When I was in my office at work, I'd hear people say, oh my gosh, I'm so stupid. Why did I do that? I'm so dumb. How can I even do that? And sometimes this inner dialogue is so tightly intertwined and ingrained into our mind that we aren't even aware that it's happening. It's just there in the background, in a loop. Man, I'm dumb. God, I'm stupid. We are our own worst enemy, and we have to change that dialogue. Because you wouldn't tell that to someone you love. You would never tell someone that you love, you're stupid and dumb. You're not worth anything. No one's going to love you. You would never say those things. But why are we saying them to ourselves? Why are we repeating those things in our mind? So let's also touch on this sentence that Joanna says, that through pride, selfishness, and the disguise of apparent social convention, we give life to all of these negative things. That's why it's important for us to be self-aware. Being self-aware is a term we almost feel that it has been beaten to death in our society. Self-help, be self-aware, inner reform, all those terms seem to be overused, and we fear that it's even lost some of its value. But truly, if you can't measure something unless you're aware of it. And if you can't measure it, if you can't name it, how can you change it? You can't. So if I'm not aware that I'm prideful or selfish, or that I have multiple masks on, I can't really change myself now, can I? And we're going to get into that, why it's important to take time out of your day to review your day, review your emotions, or however you feel it fits you. Some people like to journal, other people just like to meditate and reflect on their day. There are different ways to go about this. Joanna goes on to say, Jesus knew how to identify them, these people that suffered from pride, selfishness, and the like. Jesus knew how to identify them as no one else has ever managed to do in such depth. He listened to those who approached him, even though they tried but failed to hide their real motives. Hypocrites and deceivers were laid bare before his piercing vision. So even when people tried to come up to Jesus and put on their facade and put on their masks, Jesus just stripped away that onion. And you, when in the face of Jesus, of the Christ, you were laid bare. You became completely vulnerable. It just was the magnetism that Christ had. His moral position overwhelmed them. He confronted them either with love or vehemence, depending on the circumstance and their intention, but he was always benevolent. He taught each one to go within and scrutinize him or herself in order to root out the unfolding webs of evil. So when someone comes to us and has all these issues with somebody else, one of the good tactics that we can take from this psychology of Christ or psychology of Jesus is that when someone's coming to you and venting, or someone's coming to you complaining about someone else, it may be a good idea to invite them to do a self-reflection. Now, we're not saying that we're all going to become therapists, nor is that our jobs. But taking away from the way, this Christ consciousness, the way of Jesus, how he dealt with people, it's something for us to definitely take the time out to learn, to read, to study about, so we can improve our relationship with ourselves, with our own emotions, with our shadows, and in turn with everybody else. Because when I'm happy with myself, when I'm at peace with myself, I'm able to be so with others. Immediately afterwards, he would encourage them to grow personally by dismantling the mental and social dynamics that were conspiring for widespread decadence, due to the drop in the cultural and emotional level that should comprise the foundation of society. So as soon as they would come to Jesus and he would talk to them and he would encourage them to go with him, it was like he gave them a prescription. And on that prescription, on that notepad, he wrote, go within, work on yourself, grow personally, but grow by looking at the mantle in which we've set our mental and social dynamics. Because oftentimes, social fads or fads in general, which come and they go, they are responsible for pushing down society, for lowering our moral, ethical values. Again, it's questioning the status quo. Just because it's popular, just because everybody's doing it doesn't mean that I should do it too. It's quite simple, but also very complex at the same time, because we are complex beings. Nothing is just simple, because we live many lifetimes. We have a lot of baggage that we bring with us. And one of the main things of those baggage is that lack of self-compassion for ourselves. Because once we reach a point where we want to better ourselves, that we realize that the life we've been living is not the life that we truly want, or perhaps I'm not truly happy, or what I'm invested in does not bring about true happiness for me. And one of the things we begin looking at is ourselves and all the things that we've done incorrectly or messed up in. We begin to have that feeling of guilt, or many feelings of guilt and embarrassment for the things that we've done, and feeling bad. So then because it's ingrained into our humanity of crime and punishment, then we feel we need to punish ourselves. And Joanna, time and time again, talks about self-compassion and the need to work on ourselves. Food for thought for us to really think about. And she brings in, as she always does, the memory of a disciple, Peter specifically. We're all familiar of that famous biblical story of Peter, and when he was questioned if he knew Christ, and he denied Christ 3 times, and Christ had actually prophesied to him and told him ahead of time, hey, you're going to deny me 3 times. And Peter's like, no, I would never, Jesus, I would never deny you. And in fact, it does happen. And Joanna talks about that a little bit. She says, Peter's thrice repeated denial of his friend serves as a powerful lesson. For as soon as he came to his senses, he wept bitterly. The explosion of tears was a cathartic chance for him to free himself from the remorse that could have rendered him neurotic and led him, like Judas, to the shame of taking his own life. Peter, what he did in that moment and directly after it was a powerful and is a powerful lesson for us. Because at that moment, he reached that fork, a proverbial fork in the road, much like that famous poem, and my mom brain, I'm completely blanking on it. I think it was Robert Frost. Yes, it's Robert Frost. And I took the road less traveled. So it's kind of like, you come to this fork in the road, and which road do you travel? So for Peter, he could have gone down the route that Judas took because of his immense guilt for what he had done. But Peter went the other way. He decided to literally live his life sharing Christ's message. That's why he was known as Peter the Rock, or Pedro the Rock. It's a great story to look at and reflect on. There's a reason why Joanna brings Peter as this example in this particular chapter. He rose from his downfall and defeated his enemies, fear and cowardice, to spend the rest of his life striving to make amends through practicing the good. He rose from his downfall and defeated his enemies. Who were his enemies? Fear and cowardice. Fear and cowardice. That's what led him to deny Christ 3 times. He was fearful, and it was an act of cowardice. He didn't want to deal with it at the moment. Believing in Christ in that moment, he was surrounded by people who did not like Christ, did not believe in Christ. He just was scared. How many times in our lives have we found ourselves in such a predicament where I don't want to face the reality of what's going on? So I cower. I don't deal with the situation. I go silent because I'm scared. Whatever the many reasons might be for us. That's why in the Spirit's book, they say that evil persists because the good people are timid, and evil is not. It's boisterous, it's loud, it's not fearful. But sometimes and often, the good, they're fearful people. Oh, I don't want to get involved. I don't want to get my hands dirty. It's not my business. And what comes to our mind specifically is this story, and we don't want to bring down the vibration here, so we won't go into great detail. But it was a story of a gentleman who saved the life of 3 girls who were being held captive for over a decade, right next door to him, or one of his neighbors. And he just happened to be passing by and heard this girl yelling and screaming. And instead of looking the other way and just saying, I don't want to deal with that, I don't know what that is, he decided to investigate and see what was going on, and ended up these 3 girls had been held captive and had been kidnapped 10 years plus prior as young teenagers, never to be heard of again, thought to be dead. But this neighbor, although albeit I'm sure not perfect, but set aside his fear and just did what needed to be done. Just did what needed to be done. Joanna goes on to say, Jesus in turn accepted his offering of love and utilized him in his ministry. And the same can be true for us. Just because we commit commit one huge bad thing, to state it simply, doesn't mean that we still can't be used for goodness. We see that in the life of Paul and many other disciples and apostles. Just because we've had our moments or periods in our lives where we weren't the greatest or the best doesn't mean that we still can't be utilized as instruments of good. There's always time to turn it around, to redo. The time is now, not to wait. Joanna goes on to say, the master knew Peter. That is why he predicted his defection and weaknesses, pointing out the inner enemies against which Peter would have to struggle. All this tells us is that when we ourselves are struggling, and we're so apt to point out the exterior reasons why it's because of this person or this circumstance. And although those things definitely have an effect on us, they are not the driving force as to why we are suffering. The driving force lies within ourselves. We need to get out of our own way and be mindful. Call out our shadows and name them for what they are. But be loving and compassionate and forgiving to yourself. And let's be like Peter and just, you know what? I wasn't great, but now I am going to be. Because you realize what you were doing before just wasn't working. And that's what Peter did. He went out and lived the rest of his life that way, living Christ's messages, healing people. In the book Boa Nova, I believe, I don't think it's yet in English, but it's translated, it's called The Good News. I believe there's a story about Peter in there, and probably we can confirm that later. But it's a beautiful story of how Peter shares his ministry and how much he was changed and lived authentically and with his heart. Although we label the following text in this chapter as Joanna's final thoughts, and indeed this is the end of her chapter, but it's not the end of the work that we need to continuously do on ourselves. But having shared this message, some of it sometimes a bitter medicine that we have to take, Joanna always comes in with that soothing balm of, self-compassion, love, reassurance. And she goes on to share the following things. Do not be afraid to confront your shadows, those enemies stirring within you. And when she talks about the shadows, when we've talked about this before, it's a nod to the Jungian archetypes, the shadow, the anima, the animus, the persona, and the self. And the shadow is nothing more than those parts of ourselves that lay generally within our unconscious mind that are sort of pushed back. It's parts of ourselves that we are not aware of. A large part of who we are is driven by those things that we are not consciously aware of. And she refers to those things stirring inside of us as enemies because they're us holding ourselves back. She says, be strong and focus on Jesus, the proper therapist. Let your emotion reach him. Be strong and focus on Jesus, the proper therapist. Let your emotion reach him. Whether that means taking 5-10 minutes out of your day to just sit with Jesus, to sit with his thoughts, to connect with his vibration, I mean to say. Even if we are enduring a great sorrow and a great hardship, inevitably what happens is that our vibration begins to fall. So it becomes more of a challenge for our own spirit guides to inspire us, to help us. So we have to try to raise our vibration. We're not saying that, fake it till you make it. We're not saying just pretend you're happy or forget about your hardships. No, we're not saying that's not what is being said here. But connect. Allow yourself to view Christ in front of you as if you were on a WebEx call with your therapist or in an office with your therapist. Even if you've never had a therapist, let's pretend that he is your therapist. And allow your emotions to just pour out to him. Now, there's actually not only a psychological, but sort of, we would say, scientific reasons why to do this. The opening up and allowing ourselves to be vulnerable. Even in therapy, they use such models. They ask you to think of something or someone specifically who you hold in such high regard when you want to create a safe place in your mind, for instance. This is a technique that therapists can use, especially for people who suffer from, any varied levels of emotional, psychological issues. It's creating a safe space that you can go to in your mind when you are feeling disconnected, scared, fearful, whatever, unwell. You can create this safe space using Jesus. and just allow that space to be just the two of you, where you can open up truly and be vulnerable. And that focusing on Christ, raising your energy up, allows for you to us to also in return receive that healing energy and that inspiration from our guides. It's that moment where our guides are like, yes, she or he's connecting. I'm able to go and help them and offer my warm embrace. Joanna goes on to share with us, do not fear the adversaries with which you unconsciously live. One of the things that are very scary is looking at ourselves. And we might very much be unconsciously afraid of uncovering our so-called demons. And we've learned to not to use that verbiage anymore because words have power. So along with a friend of mine who I've been talking with the last few years about this idea of changing that common phrase of, oh, my demons, the demons within me, to changing that verbiage to, to be more kind to yourself, because essentially you're calling parts of yourself demons, which isn't necessarily very kind. And so we need to shift into more compassion for ourselves. And then in turn, that'll lead us to, or enable us to be more compassionate towards others. So instead, you can call it parts of myself that are challenging. And Joanna says, don't fear those parts of yourself that you think, oh gosh, I don't even want to think about that. I don't want to know. If you're at that point where you're like, Kirsten, Joanna, I'm just not ready. I know that that part is there. Okay, fine, I can stop calling them demons, but I'm just not ready. Okay, that's okay. What we would recommend is sort of a step before your first step is send your shadows love. Send to yourself, imagine in your mind, that part of yourself that lies within the unconscious part of you. Send that parts of yourself love. Let them know that you love and you want to love those parts of yourself. You want to express compassion to them, those parts of yourself, to enable that part of yourself to feel more accepted and more willing to come forward and be processed and healed. Because ultimately, those are parts of ourselves that just need healing. They don't make us bad people. We're not inherently evil. We've just, at times, uh, developed negative habits, to put it simply. But in turn, we tend to view ourselves as horrible, evil people or just not great people, whether we consciously or unconsciously view it that way. But Joanna tells us, she says, identify them one by one and then unburden yourself of their pressure on you. That takes work, guys. It's work. It's a lot of work. Roll up your sleeves to work on yourself, to accomplish what Joanna is talking about here. You're going to sweat. It's going to be like you just left the gym and every part of you is like aching. But at the same time, you feel good because you know that you're doing the work that you need to do to get what you want to be, where you want to be. Identify them one by one and unburden yourself. Let go of that heavy weight that you carry from feeling bad about yourself, from feeling bad about those parts of yourself that you can't yet conquer, but you will. And sometimes it takes us changing the way we say things, which have power. And recently we heard this, we participated on this online live seminar, and this one particular presenter had said, one of the reasons why, people can't stop their bad behaviors is because they keep saying, I'm going to try. Don't try, train. Say, I'm going to train. I'm going to train to get better. I'm going to go to the gym to train to get better. So today I'm going to train myself to start running by walking first. I'm going to train myself to be better by journaling, by becoming more self-aware, by working on myself, by living more with intention instead of utilizing social media, different platforms, even things such as like podcasts. Instead of listening to things that are not enriching my mind, being more intentional with how I'm living and acknowledge that whatever I'm feeding myself is going to bring about those things. So if I want to live more spiritual or be more conscientious, I want to be more aware of said things, then let's feed ourselves those things. I digress. She says, recover your humanity and be yourself. Recover your humanity and be yourself. Oftentimes, this can happen after drastic things happen in our lives. So we don't want to reach that point. That's not ideal. Sometimes it happens because it needs to, because it's in our reincarnatory plan. God has ordained it, if you will. But there are many stories out there of such things. When the tsunami hit in 2004, I believe it was Indonesia, there were a couple of well-known celebrities, some not so well-known, but celebrities nonetheless, one of which was one of Oprah's decorators, interior designers. I believe his name was Nate Burkus, I believe. He, at that point in his life, he already was famous. He had a lot of money and all these things. So him and his partner actually had taken a trip to Indonesia, a vacation, and were together somewhere on the beach or nearby the water. And he recounts the story of that moment that his life completely shifted. He was there with his partner, whom he loved tremendously and immensely. And in an instant, that person whom he loved and his life in an instant changed. And he recounts the story of trying to tread water and just seeing his partner go down in the water and it being the last time he ever saw him. And that after everything had settled and after he flew back to the States and took an inventory of his life, he shifted. What was once important wasn't important anymore. How he treated people, the kind of person that he was, how he viewed himself on the inside, everything shifted. You can say he recovered his humanity and leaned more into himself, not in a selfish way, but in a way that made him whole. The way in which Abraham Maslow would refer to on his hierarchy, it's self-actualization, that part of you that reaches that epitome of who you can be, your best self, and being authentic. And Joanna acknowledges that we live in society. She says, mix in with everyone in your social group, but preserve yourself. Preserve yourself by not giving in to the impositions of devouring, neurosis-producing consumerism. We can live in society without being consumed by it. It is possible. We're not talking about going to extremes, but it is possible to have a balance. If you feel the need and it's all the rage, it's kind of not sure if it's a fad. It's existed before it's been a fad, but people giving up everything, selling all their belongings and living in a tiny house or in a bus. This is a kind of a big thing right now. But those situations already existed before this fad became big. But we're not saying that you have to do those things, to live like a pauper in a cave with nothing. No, we are meant to live in society. We are meant to be with each other. And Joanna says, mix in with everyone in your social group. But we don't have to be slaves to consumerism. But our system and our society is set up that way for us to be slaves. And unless we become more aware of it, it's hard to break that. She goes on to say, be open to renewal, diversity, and your self-identity. This is so relevant to our times. Renewal, be open to renewal, be open to diversity, and be open to your self-identity. That in of itself, self-explanatory. In The Happy Life, in the small book that Divaldo published by Joanna, it's a small book of messages. She has this phrase in there, be open to new ideas. Be open to them. And finally, she says, unburdened of perturbing preventions and precautions, you will enjoy optimism, an essential factor for a healthy life and wholesome social relationships. Once we unshackle ourselves to all that which is passing, which can be labeled as a fad, which we know for sure in 10, 15, 20 years is going to change. When we unshackle ourselves from that consumerism, from our negative shadows, and embrace ourselves as we are, and begin that journey of self-love, confronting our shadows, doing the work, we're able to experience optimism. We're able to experience positivity. And just as we're wrapping up right now and we're ending, just some final thoughts on the shadow that we can take home on how to heal ourselves with shadow work. Now it's a popular term to use. We don't need to have self-pity and feel bad for ourselves, but we can show ourselves love, pay attention to our emotions, show ourselves and infuse ourselves with compassion, and identify those parts of ourselves which we deem as the shadows. Record your findings. And the reason why recording your findings is important is so you can see your progression. And there was a beautiful interview that Matthew McConaughey gave probably maybe in the last year or two, give or take, where he actually shared that for, 15, 20 years of his life, he had hundreds of journals that he had kept. And that he always said one day he was going to go back and revisit these journals to see what lessons he could draw from it, if he could publish a memoir or something to that effect. But he said he spent years and years and years not wanting to really face the shadows of what lied within those books, those journals that he himself wrote over 2 decades. He just didn't want to deal with his younger self in those books. But he actually, in this interview, shared that when he finally decided to take like a few weeks. He took all his journals with him, went to go be by himself. He told his wife, Camilla, look, you stay with the kids. I need to go and do this. His wife was totally supportive too. And once he dived into, he actually found so much about himself and all the things that he was scared of. He wasn't scared of anymore. It was like he embraced a whole new part of himself that he knew was there, but he just didn't want to deal with it. That's why it's important to record our findings. You could do it nowadays with modern technology. You can do this in your phone, in the notes section, however else you want to do it. And this other tip, pursue a hobby or a project, we would sort of paraphrase that in the way to say setting goals for yourself and setting goals in terms of what you want to put your energy to. Because those things help us find purpose in life. And of course, there's so many benefits to all this. We become focused, we have better physical and mental health, things become more clear, and we become more mature. And there's this famous quote by San Juan de la Cruz, Saint John of the Cross. He's a 16th century mystic and Catholic saint. He says, if a man wishes to be sure of the road he's traveling on, then he must close his eyes and travel in the dark. Now, taken literally, that makes no sense. You wouldn't go on a trip and close your eyes. No. He's referring to the shadow work. He's referring to going inside of ourselves and taking a serious, authentic, genuine look at ourselves first and see who we are. Because when I understand and accept my own darkness, that I was consumed, when I understand and accept my own darkness, I can be consumed by my own light. I'm paraphrasing this quote here. But when I'm able to go to my shadows, it's like turning on a light. So it's a beautiful thing. Something we're often unconsciously or consciously scared of, when it's actually something quite amazing and life-changing for each one of us. So we thank you all so much for listening to this talk. And again, we just wanted to share that please take the time out to read this chapter, purchase this book if you don't have it already, because it truly is amazing. Whether in whatever language you need to read this book in, I'm sure it's amazing. This psychological series of Joanna is, to say the least, life-changing. So if you haven't gotten a copy of any of the books on the initial list that I showed, now would be the time where the universe is just telling you to go for it and start your journey. Don't be scared. Begin today. Don't waste another minute. Every moment of life is precious. Every single moment. So thank you to each one of you who have been listening. I know that there are some comments in the chat, and I'm sure, let me just come out of this. I'm sure that we're going to be coming back to, there we go, our main screen. Let me just switch around here. And I'm sure Leo will be sharing.
Amazing talk, Kirsten. I mean, this is an amazing reminder for all of us to deal with the idea of enemies, right? When we truly analyze what Jesus is bringing to us in terms of enemies, it invites us, the message, Jesus invites us to dive within ourselves and discover the enemies within, but not in how am I going to say this, in a negative way, in a positive way, in a liberating way, right? So thank you for this amazing reminder for all of us. I would like, as usual, to give thanks for everyone who is following us now. Also welcome all of those who will be watching us in the future too. There are a lot of good evenings. There are a lot of welcomes here. So welcome everyone. And as usual, we like to go into the questions and
Yeah.
the comments that can lead us into a further discussion to enlighten us even more. And one that I would like to share here
Sure.
is actually by Yasko. Yasko says indifference is, I believe she said, is more serious, a more serious lack of, I'm sorry, indifference and more serious lack of empathy. This idea when we present ourselves, we put ourselves in this mode of indifference, right?
Yeah. Yeah. It really adds to that level of um, the dehumanization of people in society. We just stop caring, lack of empathy and compassion. Yeah.
Awesome, awesome. And then Paula asks, do you think the internet promotes judgment through its thumbs up or down when spiritually we are being called to be non-judgmental? Excuse me.
Wow, what a profound question, Paula. And that's such a great question. You guys always have such great questions and comments. So thank you all for sharing this. So I'll do my best in responding to this. Of course, social media can create this culture of like good and bad, thumbs up, thumbs down kind of culture where it's like, or this person has more likes culture, this person has more views kind of culture, and that equals to that person being cooler or better. So for sure, I mean, all things affect us as a humanity because oftentimes or sometimes people live their life more online. So it sort of becomes a sub-reality of the reality that we're living in because we are constantly, there are hours and hours and hours we spend on our phone, on social media or social media platforms and being influenced by that. Joanna says that everything and everyone influences us, whether we realize it or not. So yeah, you know, on YouTube when they have the like and dislike button and other social media platforms when you can make your feelings known by the click of a button, sure, that can add to us being more judgmental. But there's always a balance that needs to be striked, right? Because we need to be able to acknowledge things that are good and things that are not so great or downright um, devious in some way or form. We're allowed to have our opinions, we're allowed to be able to share them, but in the context of being respectful to others. And it's not something that we generally see. It's not something that is popular. Cancel culture in this generation is super popular. Some of that is good in the sense that there are a lot of negative influencers out there that have been doing really not so great stuff. So then there's like hundreds of thousands of people from around the globe just get on the internet and, quote unquote, cancel them. So in a way that's good. But in the same way, it's not in other contexts and in other ways. So, yeah, there's a lot of weight that social media platforms affect the way in which we view the world. Even there are times that people are more likely to put a negative comment on a video, but if they were face to face, they may not actually say that. So, yeah, it affords people a sort of luxury that wouldn't otherwise exist. So it does create this negative occurrence that we become super judgmental because it's easy just to look at something on a screen and to not connect with it. It's easy to do that, to watch a video and not be connected to it and not have any emotional connection to it and just say, type in your comment section, in the, while you're laying in your basement or in your bedroom and not even giving a second thought as to how this could affect another person. And so, yeah, I hope that answers your question to some degree, Paula. But yeah, everything has an effect.
Yes, thank you, Kirsten. Giving continuation to the comments, DB, sorry, I don't know what that stands for. Not only is it hard enough to rid ourselves of negative thoughts about oneself, but people can also make it worse by how unforgiving people are, and sometimes for their selfish benefits to put you down. Hmm.
Absolutely. And it becomes a popular thing to just be a mean girl, so to speak. Again, I want to say it's not just girls, but it's this mean girl culture where it's like, "Ugh, whatever, you can't sit with us, kind of behavior where it to some degree is made popular by some people that are in the limelight or that are, you know, famous on social media or celebrities that have a tendency to just be mean. It's not always the case, but yeah, I mean, definitely it's difficult when we have people out there who are so unforgiving and cold. But then we have people that really show us really good examples, really great stories that don't always get um, the their um, social media time on the air. They're not their stories aren't shared as much as the negative stuff is shared. It seems as though we live in a culture and a society that loves, gruesome things, watching riots and wars and all these things. Yet when it comes to reading and sharing stories of positivity, uplifting behavior, those aren't always sometimes they are shared a lot, but sometimes they're not. And we need to be more conscientious of what we're sharing and what we're doing in our lives and how we're behaving, not just on social media, but even also within our lives. But we say a lot of social media now because of the pandemic. People are even more so now connected more than ever. So much so that in the community we live in, recently, there has been a tremendous increase in internet usage that our local internet provider decided to conveniently change and to charge more. And that's not just with us, other members. We actually just found out today in our community here, just in the county or small neighborhood we live in. It's not so small, but that they too have experienced this across the board. So people are online more. So they're even more engaged in this sub reality. So we have to be conscientious of what we are immersed in.
Thank you, Kirsten. Giving continuation to the questions, Paul again says, do you think that becoming swept up in the herd mentally relates to being ungrounded, excuse me. As an example, not knowing your beliefs and boundaries. Very good question.
1000%. Becoming swept up in herd mentality relates to being ungrounded. Absolutely, it can, for sure, whether it's online or not. Although we are social beings and we're meant to be and live in society, we can definitely get swept up in this, like, oh, I'm just going to go with what everyone else is just saying. I'm just going to be a sheep. Just going to be a sheep, and not saying you should be a fox or a wolf, but I'm just going to be a sheep and just go with all the other sheeps and not consider it, and just going to be part of the herd. I don't want to stand out. I'm fearful. Of course, absolutely. That makes us be disconnected from our authentic self. That can disconnect us from being grounded because we're not necessarily in touch with our beliefs and our boundaries. So it is important for us to constantly be in touch with ourselves because it is very easy. It's so easy to get caught up in this herd mentality of just going with what everyone else is doing. I don't want to be the odd man out. And this not just occurs when you're a teenager. This can happen when you're an adult. I see this happening in when we, pre-pandemic, when we were in the office and people not wanting to speak up because, oh, I don't want to be, the odd man out. So definitely. So that's why it's important for us to work on grounding ourselves, work on connecting with our spiritual selves in whatever shape or form that looks like for you, that's healthy. So thank you, Paula, for your questions.
It was an amazing question because we see this behavior off and on from people just diving into this idea of everybody's doing it, why not, right? And in reality do not know what they want, right? Or they didn't even have thought about what they want of life. So great comment, thank you. Daniel asks, in this chapter, does Joanna gives any practical tips on how to deal with those enemies that have not been among us anymore, i.e., the discarnate ones?
Yes. Yes, Daniel. Thank you for your question. Yes, this whole chapter, this entire chapter are the tips. Why do I say that? I say that because it's very easy for us to place blame on external things such as the spirit world. Um, in fact, they do indeed affect us and influence us. But if we want a way to how to deal with those whom we've wronged in the past, in past lives, and those spirits are lingering around us, because inevitably they can find us again in whatever shape or form, how do we deal with that? Well, the best way is for us to be the best version of ourselves, to work on ourselves, because then we're changing our vibration and that enemy from the past. And we say that with all the compassion and love in our hearts, because really they're not our enemies. It's just usually people we have wronged in the past or had a bad situation happen. So the best way, the best thing we could possibly do is to raise our vibration. The interesting thing is not getting the resources to people. It's not that we have to find more ways to reach people. The problem, the real problem is that we, people, humanity, when a person takes joy, they find happiness in that negative behavior, in that negative life. They don't want to change. They're stuck in their ways. We are sometimes stuck in our ways, that we are benefiting from that behavior or from that life. They say it's one of the, in Andrea Louise, when you study Andrea Louise and you study obsession, what they say is that the hardest part is not getting good spirits to help someone who's obsessed, to help someone that's in a dire situation. That's not the difficult part. The difficult part is to get that person who is in it to want to get out of it, because some part of them is benefiting. There's some part of them that's connected to all that. So they have to reach a point where they say enough. But how can you reach that point? In many of the books of Andrea Louise, you can see case after case. Leo and I did which I'm biased, but I think we did a great study in the book Action and Reaction. You can find it online. Great stories of people from Andrea Louise in the spirit side of life, when they give detailed stories of people and how these people are in obsessions or in bad situations, and that the best thing to do is to try to help that person who's in that bad situation change, especially when you're under a heavy obsession, is if you begin to change yourself, whoever's connected to you inevitably will be influenced, and you'll be able to dismantle one by one those links that oftentimes in these books you can read, it's like prongs that are steeped into us, prongs from our enemies that keep us slaves to ourselves, to our bad behaviors, to whatever that's negative. And the only way out is for us to work on ourselves. That is the advice from Joanna. That is the advice from Spiritism. That is the advice from Andrea Louise in his books. You want to get out of an obsession. You want to get out of a bad situation. You want to get out of whatever is negative. Look inward. That is where it lies first. And then you'll be able to conquer the exterior things. You'll be able to manage. So I hope that I gave you a mouthful there, Daniel. I'm not sure if you were expecting that, but it's what you got.
No, very well explained, and thank you. Important question, because we have to always include the other side as well. I'm gonna pose the question, the comment in question here by Yasko, but I think you already answered as well, especially with this last question that you answered when she says, "Great, Kirsten. We witnessed by the rising number of divorce, suicide, depression, more." The effects of fake connection through the social media, lack of compassion and empathy towards us and others important in our lives. How, with the teachings from Joanna de Angelis and Jesus, we can regain true connection, solidarity? Did the COVID lockdown in homes help or worsen?
Great question, Yasko. Fantastic question. Yeah, I think I touched on a little bit of this, but to simplify it, because it's really not that simple, but making a conscious decision to want to have real connection, to state that, to put that intent out there that I want to have real connection. And you can have real connection. You can be authentic on social media. You can be compassionate. You can be all those good things, whether on or off social media, by first wanting and deciding. Joanna says, first, decide to be happy. Decide that we want to be more authentic. Decide that I want to come in contact and deal with my shadow self. Make that conscious decision and begin the work. Step one, and go from there. For everybody, it's going to look different because we're all so uniquely different. And sure, COVID presented a situation for us as a huge opportunity of growth. And sure, it worsened some situations for sure. The increase in domestic abuse and abuse in general, the numbers went up. And sure, because people were faced or forced to face one another, there was an increase of divorce. Because before, where they could just avoid one another, not have to deal with the problems, now they're being forced to see their partner every day. So it forces you to face certain realities that before perhaps we were hiding away in our jobs, overworking, being a workaholic. Not saying that all workaholics are trying to avoid their family, but when the shoe fits. So yeah, there's always positive and negatives to everything. As our dear Paula we always quote her, because it's a great saying or question she posed. What can I learn from this?
Right.
What can I take away from this?
Well, Kirsten, I wish we had more time
Yeah.
to continue with this. There are some other questions and comments here. We'll try to send them over to you if you pose your questions. But time has come. I would like to remind everyone to check our calendar to make sure that we are connected and in different meetings, not only on the Saturdays, but the studies that we do. If you do need any help, please contact us so you can also participate on our help that we provide on Mondays with the fraternal assistance. With no further ado, I would like to go ahead and ask everyone to pray with us, and I'll ask Kirsten to finalize for us tonight. With
Leo, I'm so sorry. Before we jump to that, can I be a pest and say there's one other thing? I think we forgot a question here.
Okay.
From Aloisio. I kind of wanted to answer it as well because I had seen it earlier. If we can put up Aloisio's question, if you don't mind.
Sure. Okay. And then you can lead us straight into.
Yes, then we'll lead us straight into prayer. Yes.
Sure. Thank you.
Promise. So I'll go ahead and read it. He says, Hi Kirsten, my nephew works in an advertising/marketing agency. He went to college for it because it's his passion. How should he take his profession so he doesn't stimulate consumerism in people? Wow, that is probably one of the most challenging questions of tonight that I've gotten. So thanks, Aloiso. Um, well, it's always good they say that if you love what you do, you never work a day in your life. So it's always great to be able to follow your passion and work at something that you truly love and enjoy. So at best, I could say what he could do is what I believe it was Gandhi said, be the change, live his best life, live his best authentic life that he can live. Because to do otherwise, or to try and dismantle a whole society or take it all on yourself might seem overwhelming. But if he could live his own life authentically, inevitably, that will spill over into every aspect of his life. If he can live authentically, to be humane, to be kind, and to not view, the consumers as a dollar sign, even when whilst he's creating something, a project, if he's working on it, keeping in mind that these are people. Sometimes it's just that simple step. If we could just, each of us, begin to change that paradigm one by one, we would change the collective. It's the same when people say, well, can you imagine if I say, well, I'm going to throw this piece of trash on the floor, but it's only one thing. It's only one little piece of something. But then if everyone had that mentality, the ground outside will be littered with stuff. In some neighborhoods, it is because people have that mentality. That's just one thing. I'm just going to throw out this one thing. It's not a big deal. But yeah, it is a big deal when tens of thousands of people do that. So the change starts within us. And Jesus said, before before countries change, man must change, something to that effect. So before we expect this whole society and this whole paradigm and things in our society to change, we as individuals must first change. So I hope that answered your question, Aloisio. And I think we had another question come from Alba, but I'll talk to you offline, Alba. So let us, I guess, go ahead into our moments of prayer. So if you are still on with us and following, thank you. And we do encourage you to take this moment to close your eyes. It's just more conducive to this meditative moment and allows us not to be distracted by the exterior things. So let's close our mind. Let's take a deep breath in and out. And let us connect with our dear Creator. And let us give thanks. Let us express our gratitude to be able to have this moment together, discussing such ideas and ideals, to be able to find comfort and solace in these words of Jesus and these words of our dear Joanna de Angelis. We are immensely grateful for the Spirit Society of Baltimore, all of its workers, and all the participants from this evening for making this moment possible. And we take this moment especially to pray for our country, to pray for one another, to pray for those who have passed away from COVID-19. We pray for all of those spirits that are transitioning back to the spirit realm or whom have already done so. May the good, loving spirit guides and workers of love and light be present and welcoming them back home. We pray for our community. We pray for our country. We pray for this world, that love and compassion may be written in our hearts and in our actions. We thank you, and so be it.